Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. We're going to do something a little unusual today in that we are talking about movies rather than books. So I went on a little bit of a journey. If you're new here and don't know, I love my library, and that's probably pretty common with bookish people, but I wanted to kind of explore the other sides of my library. I'm lucky to be part of a great library system that also has a library of things as well. It has great online services. And Hoopla is a service that is available not only from my library, but most libraries in the US, and is an online catalog of books, movies, and music. So I decided to travel through the foodie romcom section of the library's Hoopla catalog. And I found some good, some not so good, but it was definitely a fun time. So specifically, I was looking for those real cozy vibes, and I've been doing this over the past couple months, so they were definitely not all Christmas, but I did wind up with one Christmas themed film, and so I wanted to get this out in love of my library ahead of the holiday. So let's dive into the movies that I watched for this project, and let's work from worst to best, I think, so that we end on a bright spot. So the worst of the ones I watched was Food for the Heart. We're starting with a man who is an uncle that recently became guardian to a child and has moved. They've moved in near to a woman who is running her own meal service. So kind of one of those private delivery situations. And she's very overworked and doing everything on her own, facing a deadline for overdue taxes. And so she's just extremely overwrought about that. But she seems very nice and sweet. And immediately they have a connection, of course. But he is trying to get this child into a really high-end summer camp and isn't able to afford it because they've just moved and he is dealing with that situation. But it turns out they have an emergency need for last minute a new caterer to handle their food at the camp. And it's a much bigger job than she's ever done, but he believes that this woman who runs the meal service could do that, and if he can act as liaison between the camp and her to get her on board, he gets free tuition for the kid. But of course she doesn't know about it. So I think that the aspect that was worst about this is that secret element, but also that she never behaved like a human being at any point in this movie. Not believable acting. As well, she also kind of became utterly incompetent at the thing that she's supposed to be good at and turned to him for help over and over and over so that he can be the hero rushing in to save her. And that didn't really work for me. He also kind of talked down to her an awful lot. So I just wasn't convinced by the story or the characters or that they really had a good relationship at all for me to get behind. Next of the bottom is Baked with a Kiss. So we are following a baker who has her own little bakery in St. Petersburg, Florida, and she's always cheery and loved by the community. She has a reputation for cooking simple recipes that came from her grandma's recipe book. Now, she is so loved by her community that one of her employees secretly enters her into contention for a local major, fancy Christmas ball there in St. Petersburg. And so she doesn't know about this, but there is an event planner, a very businessy and serious guy who doesn't like her very much. So it's a bit of a grumpy sunshine. And he's in charge of event planning and also is involved in choosing the baker who will be cooking for the event. So he, as a result of that, has to go by and check out her goods. And she has been baking. Now, her goods in the community have a reputation for maybe being a little bit magical. And all of them have these very whimsical names that are potentially connected to that. So she has been baking two pies, one for love and one for success, and she accidentally switches the two and gives him the love pie rather than the success pie, and suddenly his whole demeanor changes, and he's very friendly and comes to really enjoy her baked goods. So that's just the beginning of this. It really goes down a rabbit hole of very, very convoluted plots. And that was, I think, one of the major problems I had with this, that I just didn't buy the plot. It was overly too much, and I also just never felt the romance between them at all. I think it kind of went off the rails as it went on, in fact, so it only snowballed into more convoluted plot as it went. Still toward the bottom, I have Love Served Here. This one we're following the story where an executive chef at a fancy Seattle restaurant is retiring. And so our heroine is working there and really wants that job. So she makes a bet with the business owner in order to try and get that job, that if she can turn around the worst kitchen in the city, then she gets to be executive chef. So that's a pretty decent premise, a little bit silly. But as it turns out, the worst kitchen in the area is a gastropub run by a guy who inherited it basically from his dad and has all of this personal connection, but he does not have the rigor and discipline for it. And so this is kind of a grumpy romance, and it's also a neat freak chef versus hoarder kind of thing going on, because when she shows up to help turn around his restaurant, there are literally just piles of things everywhere. So they have to physically clean up the space in order for it to even be a functioning restaurant. I really just didn't like this because at no point did I feel the romance. I just really didn't feel any connection between the people, and the fact that they were so abrasive to each other also didn't work for me. What kind of did work for me is that I think this probably was inspired by or loosely based on My Fair Lady. And so the story aspect was actually likable, but that's because it was framed off of a well-worn, well-loved trope. And so I did like that. I also really liked the cinematography. I felt like it showed off the food very, very well, but ultimately this was kind of a flop on everything else. The acting was poor, the characterization was kind of poor, and I didn't feel the romance. Now we're kind of turning into the things that I actually enjoyed mostly. So first up was Love's Sweet Recipe. Now this one we're following a grumpy lady chef who runs a diner that she inherited from her dead dad. There are a lot of dead parents in rom-coms. It's just a grim reality of the rom-com universe, apparently. So she inherited this diner and has run it with his ideals of kind of quality and home cooking. And there is a returning ex-local sports star who has lost his sports career and is starting over as a cook. And she looks down on him a lot. Like, their initial relationship is very negative. But he's kind of the sunshine of this. He's very positive in general, even though she's not treating him very well. And so she takes him on grudgingly, and they end up entered into this Taste of Idaho local competition for restaurants to end up showcased by this organization. And initially she feels like she has to go very fancy, but realizes she's going to fail if she doesn't return to her roots of cooking quality local ingredients and really focusing on home cooking and just good comfort food. So I liked all of those aspects. It got a little silly and gimmicky because there's this whole like rule book of love element, and they have to do something in rom-coms always that's just a little over the top, and that was present. However, I also was delighted by this, that Rosemary Dunsmore was in it as the heroine's mother. She was a major actress, probably in the late 80s and early 90s, I would say. I know her from Mom P.I. most prominently, but she did a lot of different things. And so she is ever present at her delightful self. I found this very light on actual plot and characterization. Even the romance was pretty light there as well. But I did enjoy it for the most part. And I would say the big negative is that the characters, or the actors, visibly did not have cooking skills, very noticeably. So I think it was not very believable. Next is With Love, You're Sweetly Salted. This one follows a Chicago-based food critic who goes by Sweetly Salted and is very secretive about her identity. And she gets blasted online, complete backlash over a negative review of a Puerto Rican fusion restaurant that she went in expecting very traditional food, and it is not that, but it's giving something new and fresh that people have been really responding to that she just didn't get, it seems. So she's put on leave at her job because of this until things cool off a bit. However, she had some interest from a publisher to write a book, and she pitches the idea of a book based on her going undercover at the restaurant that she wrote the negative review for. So she with no experience, shows up and gets the job purely based on confidence. The head chef agrees to teach her the basics that she needs in order to get by. And of course that throws them together, and she discovers his love for food and his love for what he's doing that's a little fresh and different. And so I liked those aspects of them mutually coming together and spending time over the food. Like, that was really great. I found her as a reviewer not knowing really basic things like how to chop some vegetables, really unbelievable. Where in this one she's supposed to be inexperienced, and the previous one was worse because they were supposed to actually have skills. This one, it was just a little bit too much. I could maybe buy it. So I never really felt the romance here, though. Like, it felt like they were in a natural condition to have a romance, but they never really had those conversations and progressed personally very much. But I did find it really entertaining and fun. Then we have Off the Menu. This is such a weird one. So we're following a complete spoiled rich boy who is the heir to a fast food taco empire. And despite being heir to a taco empire, he doesn't really do anything, doesn't work, and also doesn't like Mexican food. He seems to treat food as fuel, particularly because he's been training for an Ironman, and as a result is living on basically shakes and protein and nothing else. And he's always in a biking outfit and has his bike around with him. He's very annoying. So his family, their business, is having some struggles, and they're looking for a new direction. So they send him off to the Southwest to go look around and see what he can see in the cuisine of New Mexico. Well, he ends up stranded in a very teeny tiny town. I think the population was like 800 or something. And while there, he encounters the lone restaurant there. There is only one restaurant, run by a single mom, and I think it's her mother and aunt, maybe. It's a family restaurant. And she is known for her amazing cuisine and her secret chili sauce. So she is very sweet. So it's kind of a grumpy sunshine because he's extremely unlikable and awful to everyone. And he's also constantly conniving because the whole reason he's there is to try to find out things that are to do with her recipes and figure all of these things out so that he can take them back to his family. But of course, you know how that's going to play out. He ends up connecting with her because they're in this tiny little town. They just keep bumping into each other and eventually somewhat soften on each other. But I feel very conflicted by this one because I guess first off, this is the only one of the movies I watched that I knew either of the actors. And I know I've seen both of these actors before. The guy in particular was a character in My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and I liked him very much in that. And I like him as an actor, but he's so over the top and ridiculous here. And so I like both of the actors and have seen them before. However, he's just so unlikable in extreme ways. He also is kind of fat phobic, which really turns me off to any element of this, but I think that's intentional because he's supposed to be so unlikable. And that should turn me off of the movie entirely. But so much about this was really likable. Like, the setting is just beautiful. The cinematography of the restaurant that they're in, even the houses, the scenery around is just beautiful, and it really evokes New Mexico. The food looks great. So all of that's great. The writing is very cheesy. I think there was too much plot and too many twists and turns. Absolutely, especially at the end. They really try to tie in his Ironman training in a way that is so ridiculous. I think this could have leaned more ridiculous and been more of a fun movie. And it didn't quite land that. Maybe that's what it was going for. But I just had such a great time with this. So I enjoyed this one a ton. I thought this was such a fun movie, and I liked all the performances. I also really enjoyed how much it evoked New Mexico. Because of that setting, it had a majority-minority cast, which is very rare in rom-coms, and I really appreciated that this did remain true to that. One of the things that that really, I think, would be a deal breaker for a lot of people is that the heroine has a boyfriend. Well, so both of them are dating at the start of the show, and he breaks up with his girlfriend very quickly at the beginning. She does still have a boyfriend when they are starting to connect and starting to kind of get the beginnings of a romance. And so I think that will be a deal breaker for a lot of people. But I found it overlookable because the boyfriend is clearly awful and not for her, though she should have broken things off before anything progressed. It clearly was done for dramatic flair by the writers, obviously. So I kind of let it slide. We're into the last two that I actually really enjoyed. So Love's Sweet Ingredient is following a woman who is just taking over a local Atlanta small food market from her grandma who is retiring. And she has all these hopes and dreams for this market and how she can turn it into kind of a place for community, for teaching locals how to grow and cook their own food. And so she turns to her best friend, who is a PR manager. On the other side of this, we have a bad boy TV chef who's just been through a big disgrace and he needs to clean up his image, and he also needs some PR and turns to the same PR manager. And so they get thrown together, running around through the town, showing off together, being connected, because obviously this bad boy connecting with a woman who's trying to serve her community can clean up his image. So that's pretty much it. I like the simplicity of that premise for the most part. I like that the grandmother who's retiring keeps doing things at the local shop and not wanting to retire. And so she's constantly around to try and meddle and push them together. And it's really cute. I also really enjoy that volunteerism and community engagement were just at the core throughout this whole movie. So I loved that aspect. It had really beautiful cinematography as well, like great colorful scenery, a lot of outdoors shots, like they're at farmers markets, that kind of thing. And I enjoy the fact that this is Atlanta as well. We have a good diverse cast that actually represents that as well. And the last one, and my favorite of these rom-coms, was the Christmas one that I happened to pick at the end of this viewing project. So it worked out perfectly, I think. And that was The Christmas Mixer. This just charmed me, really. So in the story, we're following this situation where a local news show, like the morning news, is shutting down and being replaced with a national broadcast. So everyone is laid off before Christmas. Must be in November because they're ahead of December. And the host and the cameraman are really finding getting into the job market very difficult, very challenging and annoying. And so they come together to kind of commiserate about that. And they come upon the idea of doing almost a Christmas advent of live streamed baking her recipes from her family's recipe box. And so they pull together this idea very rapidly because it's almost December 1st, and they're going to do this every single day. And so the whole story is literally just that. It's them coming together to live stream. You get to see them doing the live streams and people writing comments and stuff on the live stream. And then them having to spend all this time outside of that working together to plan for the next day as they go, because neither of them have jobs to do. So they're just totally focused on this and spending all of their time together. Obviously, they continually connect more and more and more. And that's what I loved so much about this. I feel like the plot was very, very straightforward and simple, and it was really focused on the two of them and the growing of their relationship. You can see not just their relationship having a really natural progression, and they have real conversations in a progression that I would sort of expect of people who are getting to know each other more and more, but you also see them get to know family and the community rallying around them to the point that the online community kind of starts shipping them a bit. And that was just so charming and delightful. And this was a really heartwarming, beautiful, kind of simple movie that really captured the Christmas spirit. I feel like from the cinematography perspective, like there wasn't a lot of flair. I do like how they did the live stream aspects because that kind of looked like you would expect a bit. It was very unrealistic in the technological aspects, but I think it worked. They even had like her grandma call in on like FaceTime and they showed her on the screen, stuff like that during the cooking segments. It was really, really charming. The settings were beautifully Christmassy while staying simple as well, because we're mostly just in people's houses and apartments, and they're really nicely decorated for Christmas. But this wasn't big and flashy. It stayed pretty small and simple, and I think that's why this one won me over, because it was really just focused on the human story. So those are my 8 cozy free foodie rom-coms that I watched over the past couple months on Hoopla, and I truly hope that in the new year, I will be discovering more and more and more, because I just love my library so much, and I hope you do as well. So if I've exposed you to any new stuff from Hoopla that you want to check out, let me know. And let me know if you have any specific recommendations for things you have watched on Hoopla that I should check out, because I absolutely love how much I can use and get from my library there. So I think with that, that is all for me today. And I thank you so very much for watching, and a happy holiday.